Ahoy there! Captain Benzie here, coming at you with another ship-fitting guide for EVE Echoes. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the Serpentis Corporation Vindicator, possibly one of the most popular battleships in the entirety of EVE Echoes. So, why haven't I covered this before in a video? Well, that's because of the concept of meta. If you're not aware what meta is, it kind of has two meanings. It can mean outside of, like using outside of game knowledge would be referred to as metagaming. Like if you're playing something like Dungeons and Dragons and you sit there and say, well, actually, I know the DM likes to do this, so maybe it's that. That's metagaming. You're using information that the characters wouldn't have. It can also mean most effective tactic available, or at least that's one of the sort of rumours, and it's a good descriptor at least for what meta actually means. Now, when we talk about meta in a game like this, we're basically saying this is one of the best ships available and it defines what everyone else around it is going to fly. Because you're expecting to come across these all the time, you need to think about how to deal with that. So, for example, we know that Condor 2 is pretty much the meta of the Interceptors, and Interceptors as a whole are a meta in and of themselves. If you are a small ship pilot, chances are you're flying Interceptors because they're just the most effective tactic available to players. Now, I try not to talk too much about meta in my videos. My videos across EVE Echoes, across other games, have always basically been, this is what I'm having fun with, here's how you can too, or here's how you can have fun with the things that you want to do. I'm not going to sit here and tell you this ship is the best, skill into this one, because as soon as a balance patch comes along, everyone that I've told that to suddenly has to spend a respec, and that's just not fun. So I would rather sit there and talk to you all about what you can do with ships that aren't the meta. So when I put out the Rock Sniper and people are going, oh, why would you use this rather than the Apocalypse Striker? Because not everyone wants to fly an Apocalypse Striker. It's not everyone's favourite ship. And to some people, they're willing to go for something that's not quite as good if they can enjoy it that little bit more. Goodness knows, if all I flew was an Apocalypse Striker, I would be bored as hell in this game. It's not my playstyle, I don't like the look of the ship. I would quit EVE Echoes if that's what I was forced into flying, so it's why I've started using things like the Typhoon 2 and the Maelstrom. They may not be as effective, but I personally have more fun with them, and that's why I don't tend to talk about meta. So if you're coming into my comment section and asking me questions like, why would someone fly this when this ship's available? That's why. I don't want to just pigeonhole people into, oh, this is the best one, fly it, because that's not fun and it just destroys this kind of game. Anyway, rant about meta over. I've just been meaning to explain that for a long time because people keep asking me about this kind of stuff. Why haven't I talked about the Megathron before? Well, because the Megathron is pretty much meta. If you're wanting to do solo, sort of high-tier PvE, then yeah, the Apocalypse Striker is better, and as you'll see later on, this ship isn't quite capable of doing that. But when it comes to doing things like Tech 10 anomalies in nullsec, then this is an incredibly powerful ship for doing so, because you're not going to be jumped easily. If someone jumps into the fight with you, you can pretty much just take them out. You don't have to run. This is one of the most powerful ships for sort of standing and fighting, and it's excellent in PvP fleets for that exact same reason, as we'll talk about in just a moment. Anyway, before we jump into the rest of the video, if you do enjoy it, hit like, subscribe to the channel for all things EVE Echoes, check out my Patreon if you want to go the extra mile to help support this channel, earn some really cool exclusive merchandise, and get your name in the stars at the end of the video. Otherwise, let's jump right in to talking about the Serpentis Corporation Vindicator. The Serpentis Corporation are one of the 5 pirate factions in New Eden, alongside the Blood Raider Covenant, Angel Cartel, Gurustus Pirates, and Sanchez Nation, and those are all conveniently grouped up on the right-hand side of the select faction screen of the ship tree, so we can go into Serpentis Corporation from there. Now, the Serpentis Corporation are found mainly in Galente Federation space, so areas like Verge Vendor, Placid, Sync Liaison, Essence, that kind of thing, and their own sovereign space is found out in Fountain, so that is the home of the Serpentis Corporation. Basically, these guys are a biomechanical engineering, that kind of thing, sort of corporation. They deal in things like stimulants, narcotics, various different cybernetic implants, that kind of thing. A lot of their work is technically outside of the laws of the four main empires, which is why they're based out in their own section of Nullsec. They also have a deal going on with the Angel Cartel. The Angel Cartel supplies them ships and protection, and things like that, some of their technology, whereas the Serpentis Corporation then returns the favour, so to speak, with like narcotics and stimulants and the fruits of their research, basically. Now, we've already talked about the Daredevil, which is their faction frigate, and the Vigilant, which is their faction cruiser, so today, as I said, we're going to be focusing on the Vindicator, and I love the look of this ship. It's a Megatron, basically. It's a Megatron on steroids, though, once we look at its stats. I love the Megatron design of ship. That split hull thing is just, it's something I really like on a ship. I like that split hull aesthetic. As I think Inferis once put on the Catskull Discord, it looks like a Rifter that's been doing weights, or a Rifter on steroids, or something like that, and it really does. I love that kind of look in a ship. It's also probably the only battleship in the game that the Ascension Core actually looks any good on. I quite like that look. And if you fancy ever making it an Amar ship, well, you've got the Conquest skin there as well, just because reasons, right? I don't know why you'd do that, especially when the Dark Halo Core exists, along with like things like the Heartbreaker and the amazingly looking Golden Age. Of course, that gives you the ability to warp around space a little bit faster as well, if you're willing to sacrifice, obviously, the other bonuses that you could get from a nanocore. And in fairness, the Vindicator is probably one of the ones you can actually do without a nanocore. It doesn't really need one to be exceptionally good. This was an exceptionally good battleship before they added nanocores. Nanocores have only made it better. Anyway, let's have a look at its attributes and fittings. This is, of course, a battleship, so we're looking at a profile here of 8 high slots designed for fitting large turrets, in this case railguns, 4 mid slots, which gives us a decent amount of things like electronic warfare, propulsion warfare, signal disruption, 6 low slots as well, good versatility for your weapon upgrade modules, tanking modules, that kind of thing. 3 of each of the rig types as standard, and 2 drone launching tubes. These can launch small, medium, or large drones, including sentry drones. I personally tend to stick to medium drones, but you might not need to in a Vindicator because of its abilities, as we'll see later. Defensively speaking, it's okay. 113,210 is good for a battleship. It's just not as good as some of the other faction battleships. That pales in comparison to, for example, the Rattlesnake or the Nightmare and what they can achieve, but those are designed to be tanky ships. The Vindicator is still pretty chonky, it's just not the absolute beast that those two are. Decent enough capacitor banks, 11907 gigajoules, good capacitor recharge rate of 29.56, means we can actually technically shield tank it if you want to. I wouldn't, but you can if you really want to. It's a large ship at 320.5 meters. It's got an average for a battleship scan resolution, which means terrible, of 110 meters. Its flight velocity is sort of middling to slow, and it's got a fairly good mass and agility inertia modifier rating there going on. It's actually not quite as cumbersome as you might think for a ship this size. It's a little bit more nimble than perhaps some people might give it credit for. If we look at the trait description though, first things first, it's a faction ship with no roll bonus, and I get confused when people say to me, oh, why doesn't it have a roll bonus? When are the Serpentis Corporation ships getting roll bonuses? They don't need them. A roll bonus is basically there just for when scaling shouldn't matter. Like, for example, you can't really have can-fit command bursts per level of advanced large railgun operation. You can't have a flat plus 25% increase to medium cannons, for example, like the Hurricane gets as a scaling. I mean, you could have that as 5% per level, but it's when the developers don't want it to be scaling, they want the ship to have that flat bonus as standard. And the Vindicator doesn't need any more bonuses. You've already got 14% large railgun damage increase per level of advanced large railgun operation. That is an absolutely insane 70% increase to large railgun damage. You then have a 37.5% increase large railgun tracking speed, which just means that snub-nosed railguns hold onto a target remarkably well and do insane amounts of damage. Then Advanced Battleship Command gives us a 10% increase to Stasis Web Fire speed decrease, 10% increase to Stasis Web Fire effective range, and a 10% increase to Warp Disruptor optimal range. So that means if you've got a Warp Disruptor that would be doing 20 kilometers, it's now going to be going up to 30 kilometers plus 50%. 20 plus 50% is 30. Same with Stasis Web Fires, rather than 15 kilometers or thereabouts, you're looking at about 21, 22 kilometers depending on the web. And it's going to be an additional 50% effective. So if it would normally slow them down by, say, 50%, it's now going to slow them down by 75%. And you're probably already seeing why this is such a fearsome battleship. We talked about this in the Hyperion video, when you can take something like a Hyperion and you can put the core on there that gives you those same web of fire bonuses. It means that you don't need to worry too much about your webs. Your webs can hold frigates and tiny ships in place, whilst your large railguns, your large snub-nosed railguns, have the tracking speed in order to actually hit those effectively. Which means you can apply battleship level damage to small ships, and that is right there why the Vindicator is so terrifying. Now I'm going to show it in PvE, and I'm going to push it right to its limits and show that it's not like a no-brainer in PvE, but it is still a very powerful ship. And if you're doing content-aware stuff, like if you're going into, as I said, anomalies, like, you know, the Scouts, Inquisitors, or just your standard smalls and mediums and that, then if you're jumped by an interceptor, that effective range, the web of fire speed decrease, you can, with two webs, hold an interceptor in place and blap it with better tracking speed, snub-nosed railguns for insane amounts of damage. And if they try to run, well, you've got that additional 50% warp disruptor optimal range as well, that you're holding them in place. They've got to clear that if they want to warp away, assuming they're not one of those cowards who has an interceptor fitted with 9 stability through 3 warp core optimizers. Seriously, on the subject of meta, that's a toxic meta that needs to GTFO out of the game. Anyway, let's move into the fitting section. Now, I personally feel that the Vindicator is probably one of those battleships that is pretty self-explanatory in how you fit it. If you open up its skills and have a look at these things, it's going to tell you kind of what you should be looking at. You've got a large railgun increase there, so you know your high slots are going to be railguns, but are they going to be snub-nosed or are they going to be rifled? Then you see the tracking speed and you go, oh, well, okay, that's going to be snub-nosed then. Then you see the fact that you've got all these bonuses to stasis web fires, and you know that your mid slots are going to be stasis webs. If we go in and back again and have a look at our defences, you're going to see that armour and structure are your 2 biggest tanks, and you're probably going to want to go for armour fitting modules for those. Then it's just a case of balancing your capacitor and figuring out how you're going to do what you want to do. This means, of course, as I said, high slots here are large snub-nosed railguns. A full barrage here, of course, C-type large snub-nosed railguns, 340 DPS per one of these. Like, literally, this thing was at nearly 2,000 DPS before I'd fitted anything, including rigs. In just the 8 high slots, I was already nearly at 2,000 DPS. That's how insanely good this ship is right there. We're then going to have 2 Webifiers, 2 Predator Stasis Webifiers. You can see here the flight velocity adjustment of each of these is a 91.5% reduction. That means if someone's moving at 1,000 meters per second, you've slowed them down to less than 90. Literally, that's an insane reduction there that's going to take them right the way down. Sorry, 90. And my maths is right on that. 22.2 kilometers as well gives them some pretty decent range. If someone wants to do that typical thing of orbiting just outside web range, then the Vindicator's still going to be able to catch them thanks to that bonus. Obviously, drones, I've gone here for Federation Navy hammerheads. I like to stick with medium drones just because, you know, it's a good balance and it means they can hit things that aren't actually webbed. And I've gone for a couple of Vrikalarkus large energy Nosferatus to help with the capacitor stability. Because this is an armor tank ship, I went for 2 C-type large armor repairers, core obviously here. These are pretty good for their armor repair. 2 of these cycling gives an insane amount of armor repairing for pretty low capacitor usage. And then we've got 3 adaptive armor hardness. Now the third one of these should probably be a reactive, especially since I'm going to be showing this in Sweet Poison, which does primarily thermal and kinetic, so the reactive would be better here than the adaptive, but I'm looking at just sort of a generic fit across the board here and how this, you know, sort of works. If you're going up against things like Angel, or Gurustus, for example, that are using a lot of missiles and cannons which have a triple spread, then actually the 3 adaptives are probably still better than the reactive, because the 3 or 4 damage types just confuse a reactive and mean it really struggles. Now, propulsion modifier here, I've gone for a large micro warp drive just to get me in nice and close. I'll be honest, I don't like the fact that this is chewing off 25% of our capacitor, and it makes us a lot less stable than I'd like, but because of the short range of the snub-nosed railguns, we need to close those distances quickly. You might find that an afterburner does what you need it to, at which point that's recommended. I just want to get there quickly, so a micro warp drive fills that need. Rigs, I saw a lot of different stuff with rigs. I talked to quite a few people flying a Vindicator and looked at different rig builds. The common thing in the combat rigs was a collision accelerator and a burst aerator that full up extra DPS. The third slot was sometimes an additional burst aerator, sometimes an auxiliary nano pump to give additional armor repair bonus per cycle of the armor repairers. I saw people even using the armor rig that reduces the amount of capacitor required to help with capacitor stability and things like that. I've seen all kinds of stuff put here. You could obviously put an anti-explosive rig as well if you're going up against rats that are going to be doing explosive damages, but for the purposes of this demonstration, again, I wasn't going up against explosive, so yeah, no real need to. If you're doing a Mar or Galente, don't worry about anti-explosive, they don't do that kind of damage. Finally then, for the engineering rigs, I went for a capacitor control circuit and 2 semiconductor memory cells. Again, cap is life, and I wanted this to be as stable as possible. Theoretically, you can swap a C-type adaptive here for something like a large capacitor battery, and you'll see that once that fits, that helps with our stability quite a lot. You could even put on something like a heatsink. Again, that doesn't affect the capacitor all that badly. Not a heatsink, sorry, magnetic field stabilizer. Or is that a heatsink? No, it is a magnetic field stabilizer, good. Yeah, so which pushes up the DPS that little bit there, but I just wanted to go for that little bit of extra survivability to help keep us alive, and it gives you some pretty good defenses. Now for a nanocore here, there are plenty of options available. I've just gone for the Dark Halo nanocore because it was a fairly common one recently. 18% railgun damage, although again, this one you could go for something like the additional armor if you wanted that extra survivability. I just don't think that extra survivability is going to allow the Vindicator to do anything beyond what I'm about to show. Basically, I'm going to jump into Sweet Poison right now and show you that even with all of this, a Vindicator can't quite solo that with this kind of playstyle. Here I am in the second part of Sweet Poison, the harder section of it, and I've gone in the Megatron you've just seen me fit. We've got all 3 armor hardeners running, I've got both repairers running, well, one of them I've now turned it off, and we're about to come into the final wave. I've been able to do all of this in one sitting with this fit currently, but that's about to change. I just want to showcase that ultimately even the Vindicator here is not capable of soloing something like Sweet Poison with a up-close and personal brawling fit without any form of complications. But we're going to showcase what it can do in order to push it to its limit. And I know some of you might be asking the question, hang on Benzie, why are you showcasing this in like not an ideal way? Isn't that normally what you want to do? Yeah, normally it is, but because again we're talking about a meta ship here, I want to talk about the things it can't quite do before you think that this is just an unstoppable behemoth. Now, as the new wave has spawned about 40 kilometers away, you'll see that I've locked onto the Megatron, I've set up the 2 Nosferatus, and I've started to micro warp drive in closer before I got scrammed and lost the ability to use the micro warp drive. I've blapped a couple of the frigates already, and now we're going to start taking out some of the things like the cruisers and battle cruisers to help just thin the herd, thin the damage a little bit there. And you should have seen there that the 2 frigates that I blapped out of existence both got hit with those webs nice and easy. I was moving at some speed, for a battleship at least, and I was still able to hit fast-moving frigates pretty much first time without any worry. Here the catalyst, again, you see there, straight away we hit, and we lock on with those the webs, and it just takes that catalyst out. Here we're now going to have a look at going up against that Atron. I want to take the other catalyst out as well because I think that's what's scramming me here. But that Corelli Atron, I'm moving at a fair speed here for a battleship, 127 meters per second, and I'm kind of webbing a fast-moving Atron, trying to hit it with those snub-nosed railguns, and it's just not quite getting it because I am sort of moving a beam to it. I'm still hitting it and doing some damage, but not nearly as much as I would like to. I'm getting a lot of misses there, Basically, in this kind of situation, I should approach that target or at least stop moving. That'll help my angular velocity a lot, but I'm kind of sitting here going, I'm taking a lot of damage, maybe going after the interceptors isn't the way forward. So we're going to go after that Brutix and try and take that down. And you'll see that we've 3 armor hardeners going there with 2 armor repairers, and the bonus is I am still being out DPS'd. I don't think any brawling ship can do this entire mission from start to finish without having to pull away to safety at one point. But the Vindicator has one clear advantage in that you can hit every single ship here quite comfortably, so if you do get scrammed, you can quickly pick on which ships, like the Corelli Catalyst, 3 here, bye-bye, away it's going to go now. You can pick those ships and you can blap them out of existence very quickly, so you can now warp away to safety. You see, by the time I've locked on, by the time I've fired off those shots, it's pretty much gone. Even a Nemesis here, let's have a look at how we're going to do on this one. It's webbed, we've got 2 drones on it, it's going to take a decent amount of damage from those snubs. We did miss again because I am flying past it, but essentially, I don't think any battleship can just fly into 0 at any of these kind of Tech 10 storylines, brawl their way through everything, and just not worry about it. You're going to need to keep an eye on things here, and you can see I'm about to go down into hull. At this point, I should really just be pulling away, jumping back to station, repairing my armor and shields back up, and then jumping in for wave 2. It can certainly do this content. We can clear the Tech 10 storyline with the Vindicator, but it's just not going to do it in one shot without having to pull away and recharge part way through. Again though, I don't think there's a single, brawling battleship that can. Perhaps? No, I just don't think there is. I really don't think there is. But it gives you that safety, as I said, that you can go in, you can start taking out as many ships as possible, you look and see if you're scrammed, you run to safety, you heal up, you then come back in and finish everything off. And basically that's what happens here. If I were to scrub ahead, you'll see that I do actually get right down towards low hull before I escape, because I'm trying to push as far as I can to see if the armor repair is going to come up anytime soon. Spoiler alert, they don't, but we do get the ship away to safety. Anyway folks, those are my thoughts and opinions on the Vindicator. Yes, it's probably one of the most powerful brawling battleships in the game. It's still not quite powerful enough to do a Tech 10 storyline on its own without having to think about it, without having to pull away to safety and recharge, but it is an incredibly powerful ship, especially for things like PvP, so with the whole DIR reflection, Megathrons are absolutely meta on that, because they can just do some seriously insane stuff. Snipe with large railguns, and then when things get close, web them up and use your drones. Anyway folks, that's all for today. Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. Otherwise, happy sailing, and see you in New Eden.